Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm in the Hillsdale Dialogue. For those of you who are new to the show, new affiliates, the last radio hour of the week every Friday is with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, or one of his colleagues. And this week, Dr. Arnn is back, and we are continuing our series on this book, Winston Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 1. And we're up to Chapter 10, so that means there have been 10 or 11 programs already on this. And Dr. Arnn, we're here because I don't think I've been fascinated more by a book by Churchill ever than I am by this. I've never read it closely, but let's remind our new listeners, why did he take 6 volumes to cover World War I before we dive into Chapter 10?
He had to explain himself. The key to Churchill is to, understand that he was extremely experienced at preserving limited and free government. And he understood what the dangers were from an early age in all his life. And the dangers he thought were two. And one was comprehensive scientific government at home that upsets the separation of powers and makes the government unlimited, and war, especially waged by scientific totalitarian powers. And so all his life he worked to limit the cost of war. And that meant a strategy to win it effectively. So the story of Churchill in the First World War is that he's running the Navy when the war breaks out, and the Navy is the most important British military department. And he tries to find a way to use the Navy to get around the trenches that ultimately claimed the lives of 900,000 British soldiers, young men. And so he goes down through the Mediterranean, through the Straits of the Bosporus, to try to take Istanbul and break into the Black Sea, open direct lines of communication with ally Russia, and open up the Balkans to invasion from different directions. And sea power. And the effort failed. And Churchill was disgraced for a time, recovered finally. He went and fought in the trenches himself for about a year. And then he came back and he got back into the government. Now, he wants to explain all that. And, all the stuff we're talking about Churchill involved in what happens in the Middle East after the defeat of the Ottomans, that's because he came back into the government, became an important man, and after the war, too. And so this story that he tells is of the first great World War, and he invites us to conceive it as a test, not just whether we can win the war, we free countries, but how and whether we can preserve our freedom while fighting such wars. So that's what the book is about.
And Chapter 10 is the week before the war begins. It really is so focused on Churchill is running the British Navy, which must be ready on the eve of war, and everyone's getting tense. But there's sort of a message for statesmen everywhere at all times, Dr. Arnn, in this Chapter 10. He tells the reader he's very well aware that if peace breaks out, as it might until the last minute, everything he did is going to get put on the grill and roasted. He realizes that everything he does is going to be flayed and taken apart, joint and limb, but he does it anyway. It's really a chapter about the courage of a statesman at a moment that could go either way to choose to be prepared. Have you thought about that? You think he consciously wrote for future statesmen on you? You don't have it any tougher than I did. I knew I was going to lose. I was going to be tossed out if war didn't break out. He was aware of it.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, you got to remember, yes, everything Churchill does, Churchill is a teacher, in my opinion. And he wants his people and all people to understand how to live the life of freedom in power so you can protect yourself from despotism. So, yeah, everything in this book is a teaching thing. And but these particular things that he did, he mobilized the Navy faster than the cabinet allowed, and one step beyond what the cabinet told him he could go. He did do that, and he thought he'd be pilloried for that when it was over. And what they would say is, he was trying to get us into war. He was not doing that, I think. He says he wasn't, and his actions are consistent with that because he spent a lot of time previous to these days talking to the Germans about how we can put a stop to all this and not let it get out of hand. But the other thing is, remember what he did. He did go beyond his orders and violated them in one case. But it's also true, all he did was set a bunch of ships sailing without attacking anybody. And so he didn't do anything irrevocable. And that means that judgment was, because it would have been wrong if he had attacked the Germans against the order of the cabinet. That would be a violation of the constitutional processes that guarantee consent of the governed.
I also want to emphasize, it's a divided government. I didn't really know this until then. I thought it was a liberal government and Asquith was running everything. But the Liberal Party is itself a divided party. It's not unlike the Republicans of today or the Democrats of today. Right. They're a party, but they're divided. And so Churchill is dealing with a divided cabinet, and not just a divided parliament, but a divided cabinet.
Well, see, so first of all, if you study history and politics, you'll find out that so is every government at every moment in human history. Yeah, like the thing that was striking to me in this chapter, rereading it, I invite our listeners to notice it, is that one of the reasons that Churchill took those steps was that there wasn't really any time to talk about them in the cabinet. Because human beings are limited beings, right? And time is what it is. And these things are happening very fast. In the cabinet, they only had time to talk about the really big things. And what exactly to do about the Third Reserve Fleet on day X. There was no time to even bring that up, right? So somebody had to do something. I always think I have a couple of wise friends who write the most interesting articles about events. And I often have the reaction, I always agree with them, but I always say, yeah, there's too much second guessing here. They should have known that wasn't, But the truth is, what's going on? And there's one about Israel of late date. And what was going on in Israel before this attack? The answer is, there's a fight about the Supreme Court. And the facts, as I understand them, they're a little complicated, and I might get some of them wrong. The facts are, though, that the Supreme Court, there's no constitution exactly to guide the Supreme Court. And sometimes people on the Supreme Court say that they can just strike down any law. Now, it's certainly true that the current members of the Supreme Court have some influence on appointing their successors. And if that influence were perfect, you'd have an oligarchy, right? And so everybody's fighting with Netanyahu because he is undermining the rule of law by trying to make the Supreme Court accountable to the popular will. When you read what I've read of the debates about this, it makes you grateful for the Constitution of the United States and ever more devoted to preserving it, because our system is very neat and tidy about that. Our Supreme Court is ultimately responsible to the public will, but on any given day, separated from it too. It's perfect, and it works, and it's because our representative system is so carefully contrived. Now, that's all they're doing, and they're at loggerheads with each other, and Netanyahu is a tyrant, or the Supreme Court is an unaccountable oligarchy. And that means that, of course, the main topic was not, is Hamas going to send a bunch of people over the border and kill a bunch of our children? And that's just the way things are in politics.
There will be an accounting. There will be an accounting in Israel.
In these cabinet meetings, that's the way they are. I mean, I will say that just, think about the preceding chapters here. We'll think about it when we come back.
We'll do that when we come back. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding. And we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest. We're talking about this book, Winston Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 1, and we are in Chapter 10. Dr. Arnn, you've thrown me off the rails here because I got to raise a question for you. As a teacher, 2 weeks back, I was taking the Acela from New York back to the Beltway, and I'm sitting across a table from a very smart young woman, mother of 3, named Therese. And a guy who's sitting next to me has recognized my picture because I'm all over the newspaper because I'm moderating the debate the day that I'm on the train. And they begin to talk to me about the debate, and I can't say anything about the debate. And then our friend across the aisle, Therese, said, we've got to do something about the Second Amendment. We can't. This Constitution doesn't work anymore. And I said, the Constitution works just fine. And you really don't want to amend the Constitution. You can't amend the Constitution, but you don't want to get rid of it either. I was completely unpersuasive to her. She thinks we ought to toss it out. What would you have said to Therese on the train when she wants to toss out the Constitution because it doesn't work anymore?
Well, first of all, she needs an education. She's
very smart.
She what?
She is very smart. She doesn't know anything about con law.
So gun violence, right? Is that what she's upset about?
You betcha.
Right? And that, you'll never get rid of the guns in America without a police state. But you don't want that, right? So the solution there is, in the end, we have to restore the families that are broken so that, that's the problems there are very deep. I did a podcast with the great Heather McDonald yesterday.
Oh, yes.
Shown. And she goes through these numbers about gun violence. And, it comes from the areas where the boys grow up without any daddies. And the vast majority of it is from such areas. And so that's the problem, right? And one of the, politics is limited, right? It can't fix everything. It can do a pretty good job. Like I was about to say, to illustrate it, we're in Chapter 10 of Volume 1 of The World Crisis. And neither one of us is going to live long enough to finish this book on the radio. But
well, we are too.
But the story at the end of this chapter is that the British Navy is ready, and it has what it needs, and it's in the right place. And that's a major achievement and might not have been. And that was an achievement made by Winston Churchill for the 3 years leading up to the war after he became the man in charge of the Navy. And he
working
at
a fabulously frenetic pace. I mean, just around the clock, working for 3 years to get ready.
And remember, there are stories circulating constantly that we're running out of ammunition, and we've got wars breaking out all over the world. And could Ukraine and then Israel, could those things be steps 1 and 2, and step 3 is Taiwan? And do we still have the ammunition and the weapons? Have we had them in recent years to do something to stop China invading Taiwan if we want to? And if Taiwan goes, then what about Japan after that? It is not the main thrust of the American government to deal with problems like that right now. I mean, heck, the House has been without a speaker for 2 weeks. And so, I got one now, but as we tape this. But that, you see, in other words, one of the things, if you study history and politics enough, you can see that the First World War was a terrible disaster, but it was probably about as well handled in the early stages as the British might have done. Because
as Kirchner said to Churchill, at least the fleet was ready. That when Churchill's cashiered over the Dardanelles, Lord Kirchner, who's in charge of the whole shebang, says to him, you'll always be able to say, at least the fleet was ready. And that is because of what you said. And our government can only do a few things at a time. But I want it done by the written Constitution. And I am not in favor of amending it, Dr. Arnn. I just am not. It's a limited government. I want to go back to it.
A defense of the Constitution would have to do with this. It was not the plan that every detail of American life would be deliberated in Washington, D.C. And the reason is limited people don't have the bandwidth to do that. And so you want a government where things are decided as locally as possible and only national things nationally. And that means that our government is constantly distracted by the wish to run everything. I mean, God, I run a little college, and I think I know how to do it. It's certainly a lot of fun, and it's successful. But can they run the college from the Department of Education? They don't even know what it is, although, by the way, just lately they're trying to do that. And they, maybe we should be allowed to run the college.
Yeah, they couldn't run a radio show, much less a college. They really couldn't. And that tells you why you want a written constitution of limited and enumerated powers. But when we come back, the German cruiser Goeben, because it's really quite a story within a story, and it says much and it illustrates more. Don't go anywhere. The Hillsdale Dialogue continues right after this, except to hillsdale.edu or hugh4hillsdale.com. Stay tuned, America. Welcome back, America. The Goeben. I'd never heard of it until I read Chapter 10 in The World Crisis, and I learned last week that the Goeben not only was around in 1914, it lasted into the 1950s. Dr. Arnn, tell us the story of the German cruiser, the Goeben, and Churchill's decision regarding it, because it illustrates so much in so few pages.
Well, so the French have an empire in North Africa, and they have a whole bunch of soldiers over there. And the war plan was, if the war breaks out, the French will bring them across the Mediterranean, and they will join the French army and be part of the defense of France. And so they got to get them across. And they've got a navy in the in the Mediterranean. And the Navy is good, but we've been reading these chapters about how the British Navy, which is the strongest Navy in the world, has been modernized in ways that make many of its ships obsolete. I mean, existing ships, right? Because now they're going to have big guns, and they're going to be oil-fired, and that means they can go farther and faster and shoot stronger and more accurately than existing ships. And the Germans have one such ship in the Mediterranean, and the French have many ships in the Mediterranean, but they have none like that. And that means if the Goeben gets close to the transports bringing the French soldiers over, the Goeben can, in principle, destroy its protecting cover and then sink the transports.
I think the technical term is a turkey shoot.
That's it. And they're, double entendre, as we say. So that's a big worry, right? Got to find this dang Goeben. And they go looking for it, and they find it, and they're afraid it'll get away now. And they find it with a couple of British ships that can fight the Goeben. And so they want to sink it. But no, our ultimatum to Germany has not expired yet.
And let's pause on a moment. The Brits have ships that have the Goeben in their sights, and they can sink the Goeben. It's like that song, Sink the Bismarck. They can sink the Goeben, but they don't. Tell us why.
Well, they don't because they have not. They not going to shoot anybody till they give them a warning. Don't want to shoot anybody anyway. And so the Goeben is allowed to get away, basically. And it didn't, in the end, attack the French transports and cause terrible harm. But they're chasing it all. It's very, just think. And remember, in your own life, right, you got a meeting, your family calls and says, pick up the cleaning, there's too much going on. How do you get it all done, right? Well, the people who are running this war are just like us, and so they're trying to track the Goeben, and they're trying to track the German Navy up in the North Atlantic that might come and bring some ships and attack England, and troops maybe too. So there's a million things going on. They got to land a bunch of British troops. They got to get ready to do all that. And so, we got this ship here. We could sink it and eliminate that concern. And remember, they don't do it because they have to give fair warning before they go to war with Germany. And, in fairness to Germany did that to them, too, in
the First World War. In the First World War. The
That's
Nazis
right.
did not do that.
No, I mean, Hitler was like Hamas.
Yeah, right. Evil on stilts. When you were away in India.
But the Germans were not like that in the First World War. And, they did a lot of bad stuff. And they did attack people that they had a treaty not to attack, even to defend, Belgium in particular. But they did give warning first, at least of that.
While you were in India, I had occasion to talk to David Petraeus and Lord Andrew Roberts, our mutual friend, Dr. Arnn's friend, Lord Roberts, and he's my acquaintance. And they both made the point. They have a new book out called Conflict. And they both made the point that surprise attacks are almost always effective and almost never availing. Meaning, you can get the jump on the Americans at Pearl Harbor, and you can get the jump on Poland in 1939, and you can get the jump on, Hamas can get the jump on the Israelis and slaughter 1,400 people. But boy, do you make a free people mad. And once mad, once raw, it seems to me almost incontrovertible over the last 100 years that if you strike a peaceful but strong opponent contrary to the rules of war, you will lose, Dr. Arnn.
Oh, yeah. That's something we said last week. That is to say, tyrants are stronger at the beginning, and they always know what their forces are. And it's hard to tell what the forces are of a free people. They have to be gathered up. Now, one of the things you learn if you study history and Aristotle is there aren't really any invariable rules. And that means that you can't really know that it's always true that surprise attacks don't work. Maybe sometimes they do. And if you're an evil person and you're thinking of that, you could be tempted, and you wouldn't be simply foolish to try it. And that's why they do try it when they try it. Think in 1861 when the Civil War broke out, Washington, D.C. was surrounded pretty much, and there was a Confederate army in the field. Lincoln didn't have war. He had tiny little bit of war experience, none in command. And he didn't really have an army. And he appealed for 75,000 troops. Seemed like an astronomical number. And he didn't have any idea if anybody'd show up. Well, before it was over, they had, more than 1 million. But so that's right. That's the pattern, right? And just, I want to emphasize to people the great achievement here of the British, because they're a peaceful nation. They're not intending to attack anybody. but they had the Navy ready and the Army somewhat. And I fear that, we should pay attention to our military capacity and stop focusing on so much stuff that we ought not to be doing in Washington, D.C., because there should be a debate right now about whether we're ready for war.
Oh, absolutely. Now, if I did my job in Miami, and we're taping this before Miami, we will have talked about that. If I did my job, because nobody's talking about it. And it's just so ominous to me that we are not prepared. And it's sort of like Churchill in 1911 walking into the Admiralty and seeing that so much has to be done. They haven't converted to oil in the way that we haven't converted to hypersonic missiles. They haven't got the ships with the right size in the way that we haven't got enough ships. It's just we're not ready for anything. And our enemies surveil this. I want to read, Dr. Arnn, before we move on to the end. This is on page 159 of the Bloomsbury edition. The cabinet, however, this is Churchill writing, the cabinet, however, adhered formally to the view that no act of war should be committed by us before the expiration of the ultimatum. The moral integrity of the British Empire must not be compromised at this solemn moment for the sake of sinking a single ship. Interesting concept, the moral integrity of the British Empire. Churchill is constantly referring to morals. This must sound odd to modern ears. It's 100 years old, right? It's 100 years ago. So no wonder it doesn't make any sense. 110 years ago. Doesn't make sense. But the moral standing of the British Empire could not be compromised. Think that makes sense to anybody?
Yeah. Here, and I'll counter with, I'm not using the same one you are, but it's one in the third paragraph in this chapter. Churchill tells a story about talking to the opposition about what's going on. And one hopes that things like this would go on the American government today.
Oh, yeah, F.E. Smith, yes.
Yeah, F.E. Smith was, nearest thing. Churchill was they were very close friends. Churchill loved him. They're probably his best friend. Churchill wrote a wonderful essay about him in Great Contemporaries. And he writes to him and he says, there's a bunch of stuff going on here. And it's might be war. What's the Conservative Party going to do? F.E. Smith is a senior member of that party. And so he deliberates with him behind the scenes. And he can know when he does that F.E. Smith is not going to take that correspondence and attack the government in the House of Commons or before the press the next day. And F.E. Smith goes and talks to a bunch of people in the Conservative Party. And those people, too, are not going to do that. And F.E. Smith writes and says, the government can rely upon the support of the Unionist Party, another word for the Conservative Party, in whatever manner that support can be most effectively given if Germany violates Belgian neutrality. And see, in other words, that's another preparation that's happening in the middle of these urgent moves. And I wonder if we have enough comity or peace among the parties in our government today for things like that to happen.
That's a serious question, Dr. Arnn. I don't know that we do. I mean, do you think W could have trusted Chuck Schumer with a conversation about Iraq before the invasion?
I hope so. I heard a story once by a senator we both know about how he's grown used to the fact that he'll be in a conversation with the leaders of the opposition in the Senate. And the conversation will be cordial and they'll reach some agreement. And then the leaders of the opposition in the Senate will walk out and tell the press what a complete jerk he is and how hateful it all was. And he once asked the certain man about that. And the man said, well, that's just politics. But is it?
No, it's not. We'll be right back, and we're going to answer that question right after this.
Would you turn down millions of dollars per year? All you'd have to do is surrender your independence and abandon your principles for the money. That's a devil's bargain. Sadly, it's one that almost all American colleges and universities make. But one college in America says no. Our college, Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College refuses to accept 1 penny of taxpayer money, not even indirectly in the form of federal student grants and loans. By saying no to taxpayer money, we remain genuinely independent, free to pursue our original 1844 mission, pursuing truth and defending liberty. Hillsdale has over 1,500 undergraduate and graduate students on its main campus in Michigan and its satellite campus in Washington, D.C. In addition, over 3 million citizens have enrolled in our free online courses, and over 6 million American households receive our free monthly publication Imprimis delivered in the mail. You can learn more about Hillsdale's independence from government, its mission of defending liberty, and its national educational outreach programs at hillsdale.edu/penny. That's hillsdale.edu/penny. Or, if it's more convenient, text the word penny to 71844, and we'll send you a link with more information on Hillsdale's independence. That's penny to 71844.
At the end of Chapter 10, America, the Hillsdale Dialogue is underway, and we're doing Volume 1 of The World Crisis by Winston Churchill. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest if you're just tuning in. All of the Hillsdale Dialogues, all 510 of them, are collected at hughforhillsdale.com. Everything Hillsdale. And boy, do we need Hillsdale now. We need all of its charter schools, and we need its satellite campuses. We need it very, very badly. At the end of this chapter, Dr. Arnn, Churchill writes, once more now in the march of centuries, old England was to stand forth in the battle against the mightiest thrones and dominations. Once more in defense of the liberties of Europe and the common right, she must enter upon a voyage of great toil and hazard across waters uncharted towards coasts unknown, guided only by the stars. Once more, the far-off line of storm-beaten ships was to stand between the continental tyrant and the dominion of the world. Churchill doesn't shy away from saying this was a pregnant moment. A lot of people want to undermine the moment we're in right now. We're in a moment like this. People may not know it, but we're in a moment like this.
Yeah, that's we should, and remember, we do so much now in the government. And the strength of our government is that we Americans are mainly in charge of our lives. And that means the government is not supposed to be running every part of our lives. And today the doctrine is everywhere that all accountability is to a bureaucracy. And if it's not accountable to a bureaucracy, the college gets that all the time. There are attacks going on right now. Right? Whereas, where's the real accountability in Hillsdale College? We had 1,100 parents last weekend on our campus. And, they got to talk to the faculty. If we were taking federal money, that would not be legal, or at least the conversations would be constrained, you see. And that means one of the things to which we're accountable is the parents of our students. And it's an open campus, and they can go to class if they want to, and they talk to their kids all the time. And, we've been accused of maintaining a culture of rape on our campus. Of those parents who came here, 550 of them are mothers. Do you think, and 550 of their children are daughters? Do you think that that's true? And if it were true, they wouldn't know it?
Yeah, Dr. Arnn, this is not on our agenda, but I want to ask you, why is the left all of a sudden in a hurry to destroy Hillsdale? It's all of a sudden they've decided that in the midst of this anti-Semitic outburst on the major prestigious universities of the United States, this awful moment, that the problem they've got is Hillsdale College. It's so absurd, but it tells us something.
Well, we've had a terrible misfortune. We seem to have become important. And anything that's independent doesn't do what they want. And, the truth is, Hillsdale College is hard to destroy, and we're not going to let that happen. But, yeah, I'm just saying, and see, I'm actually trying to illustrate a point about the stuff we're talking about. If they're running that and everything else, how can they think about the supply chain to the military forces that are at risk and that are supposed to be defending us? And if you read Article 1, Section 8, this is the thing to say to that lady on the plane who's worried about the Second Amendment. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution outlines 3 kinds of things that the federal government can do. And more than half of the clauses in that section are about national defense. Almost all of the rest are about guaranteeing a national, unimpeded system of free trade and commerce with standard weights and measures and currency that's stable. Right?
And a post office.
Now, yeah, post office and post roads, part of the national system of commerce, right?
Yep.
But then the only others, outside those 2 purposes, the others are the government can operate in the states unimpeded on the territory where it has actual operations in pursuit of these 2 things. Now, if that's all you're doing, then you're not trying to make everything that happens in every college in the land accountable to you. And then somebody else, that is to say, private people and local people are going to have to run those colleges, and they are the only ones who can do it. And so that's right. That means that we are ponderous and cumbersome and distracted from the main job all the time. And that's why we're not very good. And that's why, by the way, we're fighting big, expensive wars in places, and when we leave, we can't even get our stuff back. And
that is why we are at risk right now. Because if the federal government's trying to run Hillsdale College, it's not running the supply chain, and it's not keeping its eye on the Chinese Communist Party. Dr. Larry Arnn, Chapter 11 next week. The Hillsdale Dialogue never stopped. The Hillsdale Dialogue is available, all of them, at hughforhillsdale.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.